English certificates is it gives the father's name, his occupation, that is on English certificates. But what it also does, it says if the parents are alive, if they're deceased or living, so that gives you a clue perhaps to look at their death certificates. It then also gives the mother's name and the mother's maiden surname. Now, if the mother has subsequently got divorced from the father, it would normally say now known as Mrs. It won't say Mrs. It would now known as. So it would give her name. The next column has the name of the minister if they were married in a church, and name of two witnesses. If they were married in a registry office or registration, and up to 1940 there were 4 ways of getting married in Scotland. You could get married on a normal religious ceremony, and that normal certificate. You could get married by declaration, and that's before 2 witnesses. And then you would go and register normally your wedding at a lawyer's afterwards, and the registrar would accept that. And from 1922 you had to give the addresses of the witnesses. You could also get married by repute, in other words cohabitation, or you could also get married on the basis that you were going to have sex and then subsequently get married.
So it was official,
yeah, so it was official. Now, the married by repute one actually lasts till the 1980s.
Really?
Yeah, so in other words, if I have relatives who live together and there was an argument in our family is, well, technically they weren't married, but I said to my father, well, technically, yes, they were. The children were not bastards because the couple were living together.
So that would be the phrase, a common law wife, common law husband.
Yes. So that would be regarded in an effect, even though they didn't, but it would be regarded as a marriage. Because married by repute, they're living together, it's recognised, perhaps they held the property together or something. So that would still be considered as a legitimate. They might not have the piece of paper, but they would be.
By all intents and purposes.
By all intents and purposes, and that's particularly important when you come to inheritance. So you work from a marriage certificate, you subtract the age, and then you go to the birth certificate. Now, obviously, in family history, you look at the marriage certificate. So, for example, I'm looking at one here, and it says that the father was deceased. So you then, in family history, we try and, it's brutally to be honest, you kill people off. You look for their death certificate. So what do we have on a Scottish death certificate? Well, a Scottish death certificate has the name of the individual, and for the period from 1855 and then from 1860 through to today, it would have the name of the spouse. 1856 to 60, they cut down a bit on the amount of information because they went overboard in 1855 certificates. They have a lot of information on them. It will give you when and where died and the time of death. If a person died, for example, and they were drowned, and the body's discovered later, it will say when last seen alive. Or if you got a old person who died on their own in a flat, or they went upstairs to bed and they died in the bed and the body's discovered the following morning, it will say when last seen alive.
Okay.
It would give you their age, it would give you their sex, and it would give you their age. Now, obviously, be careful with ages on death certificates, particularly old people. I have a relative who was supposed to be 105 when she died. I have a great deal of suspicion about she could be in her 90s.
Yeah.
Luckily, the newspaper thought she was over 100, so they gave her
a nice
obituary.
Yeah. Even
though she might not actually, but for me, I'm not complaining.
Because you've got a lot of information from that.
Yes, that's right. Now, if the person who was an informant knew the name of the parents of the deceased, then they're supposed to give that information. That naturally can be subject to inaccuracy. Son-in-laws are notoriously bad for necessarily knowing their parents-in-law's parents. People come to me and say, but my grandfather didn't know who his grandparents were. Well, how likely are the son-in-laws necessarily to know?
Yeah.
Or sometimes if you're dealing with say somebody dying, well, in this case, somebody dying was 73, how accurate is the... Well, the daughter might be more accurate, but how likely are necessarily other members to be accurate? So it's something to be sometimes slightly aware of. Sometimes these can be quite sad, for example, because puerperal fever was a big killer of women with maternity. Sometimes you will see a birth certificate for a child, and by the time the registrations come down, it will say mother deceased, because the mother's passed away because puerperal fever was a big killer. So you do have a column that gives cause of death. Now, sometimes it be a single cause of death, or sometimes it will be multiple causes of death. If a doctor was witnessed or was given the cause of death, it will give the name of the doctor and usually his qualifications. His medical, say MR, CDS, a member of the Royal College of Surgeons, or so on. Sometimes it will say no regular medical attendance. So remember, before the NHS came along, you had to pay to use a doctor. So not everybody's going to have, and they might simply say diphtheria. No regular medical attendant. In other words, particularly with children, they might not have called a doctor. They might simply have passed the child's. It then gives you the name of the informant, and their relationship to the deceased. So sometimes that's a way of working out what the accuracy of the information on the certificate.
Could it also, in terms of social history, Ken, speak to the social history of the family, and perhaps how close relationships were?
It could be, yes. I mean, sometimes, obviously, if you now, normally on the informant, if the informant is not living in the same house as or wasn't present at death, it would normally give their address. So sometimes, I mean, I have seen such situations where it's the person deceased died in Scotland, but you actually see a family member's usual residence on informants as being Australia, Canada, or something. So perhaps they've been on holiday, or conversely, I've seen visitors coming here and having died here. People visiting Scotland having died here, and the informant being somebody living. So yes, so you can build up a family picture. Also, of course, if you see a lot of children dying in infancy, that's possible. Commonality of cause of death. For example, if you see congenital deformity due to syphilis, you know that one of the parents has got a sexually transmitted disease. You have to be open, as I've said in previous podcasts with family history, that you're not always going to come across things that are necessarily comfortable. You might come across, for example, certainly with somebody I've gotten dying in Bowness in 18, that he died of opiate overdose. Now, nowadays, of course, that would be heroin or drugs. Or you might find that they're due to excess drink. So you can look at, or as I say, sometimes if you like a lot of children dying, you might think, oh, hang on, is it due to social circumstances? Is it due to the housing? So look at the addresses, look at the National Library of Scotland website, the MAPS website, look at that. Also look onto the Scotland's Places website, and it quite often has what they call the medical reports. And local newspapers, again, they might make reference to, for example, that there was a epidemic of measles or diphtheria going in at that particular time.
So that's a good opportunity to, if you like, put the time and context.
Yes, that's right. So you could say, right, I have a whole batch of children dying of diphtheria. Or, for example, as you know, this year is the anniversary of the Spanish flu. 1919, 1920 was very much so you've got a lot of people dying of influenza and pneumonia. So that again, you can put, if you're putting your family history into context of what was going on at the period, rather than just simply saying, oh well, they died, or for Physis pulmonalis, or TB, of course, was a huge killer.
Yeah.
So you might make reference to the fact that the sanatoriums, I can certainly remember Tornadee being the sanatorium in Aberdeenshire, but near Bankery. And there were TB. I certainly got a TB jab at school.
Yeah.
Nowadays, of course, unfortunately, it still has come back slightly with immigrants. And so you see diseases that don't exist nowadays and so on. But the statutory records are our bread and butter. That's what you start with. I do collect virtually all my relatives' ones. I have a very big collection of because it's enabling us to bring up a full picture. And it's from the using of these records that enables us to build up our kind of family tree to begin with before we look at other records, which is something we'll look at in a future podcast. Lisa, I don't know if Lisa's got any more questions for me at this point.
Well, what I was going to ask was that you when you're talking about one certificate, and you would suggest, right, okay, that says it on that certificate, but I want to double check on the marriage certificate to make sure. So it's always going back to sourcing that information. If I said that would be quite.
Yes, yeah, and I would say because of the availability of our records in Scotland, and because we can go to the Family History Centre, as I say, for example, in Edinburgh, pay £15 a day, and for example, there are offshoot centres like in Alloa, the Burn Centre at Kilmarnock. There's also at the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. They have outlie stations, if you want to call it, for the National Records of Scotland. Family History Centre. If you pay your £15 a day, look at as many of your relatives as possible, because, for example, as I said, the 1856 to 60 death certificates don't have the name of the spouse on them, and the birth records for that period don't have the parent's date of marriage. But if you've got a sibling born out with that period or died out with that, that information would be on there. The 1856 to 1855 certificates have much more information than any other years, and the 1855 to 60 death certificates do have the place of burial, which is very useful, of course, if you're then going to look at monumental inscriptions or gravestone inscriptions. So always look at as many of your family members. Don't just say, I'm going to do one individual. Always look at multiple ones, because that you're wanting to build up a full picture. And sometimes to get back, you have to go sideways. I mean, I know it as well, I can say certainly from personal experience, it is a real thrill when you've been looking for someone for a number of weeks and you find that record. Oh, there is. I mean, I was doing teaching an English class in English records, and I was commenting to the class this morning that it was last year that I sorted a 30-year-old puzzle because somebody it was only because I looked at the full family members that I was able to get back, because I have an ancestor who uses 3 different surnames on it, and she turns out she was illegitimate, so trying to figure out what her original birth record and birth name, and only by looking in fact at one of her children who died in infancy, and the granny was the witness then fought to the child's death, found her in the census, and then anyone would to get further back. So that's why it's important not to just look at one individual. Do look at as many as you can, because
it really can help you build up that entire picture, can't it?
Yes, that's
especially
right.
the family that you're looking into.
Yes, so I mean, in other podcasts we will be looking at RCEs, and we'll be looking at the use of the census, but I think that's kind of nicely rounded it off today. And do look at the Scotland's People website. It's got useful information on how to use the certificates. It's free to register on, to register on the website, and you have to have be registered on the website to use the family history centres. As I say, and the indexes are great. They're free. It's free to use the indexes, and that helps you prepare before you go into the thing. So